Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jaya Kula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. The question I would like to ask you all tonight, and I'll say a little bit before the discussion, is about the intersection of your spiritual practice and current events. We can talk about what's happening in our country and by default to the rest of the world in political and cultural terms. However, what's happening is so profound and so destabilizing in lots of different ways, and also engaging and perhaps distracting, that it really has direct relationship with our spiritual practice. How, or if we are not, bringing the view and what our practice and the fruits of our practice to bear in our way of relating to this. And how are we doing that or not doing it? How are we succeeding at doing that, or how are we not succeeding at doing that? There's a great degree of groundlessness right now. How are we relating to that groundlessness? There's a lot of turmoil. How are we relating to that? There's a lot of outrage. How are we relating to that? There's shock and grief and excitement and all kinds of things happening that could deepen our practice if we relate to it using our practice, or it actually could pull us away from our practice if we somehow internally decided that certain aspects of this were too important to bring our practice to them and try to work with them with our practice. When I say too important, I mean when people have crises, sometimes they say, oh, I was having a crisis, so I didn't do meditation because I was too swept up in my crises. Or I was so upset and, I didn't do my practice because, what I was upset about was so important that I had to abandon my practice for a while. You know what I mean, right? So maybe some of us are doing that too. I don't know. But anyway, it's a question. So I was saying before we started talking tonight that as a child of the 60s, and I mean a child, not a love child, I was a child for most of the 60s. I grew up in the Vietnam War era and the anti-war movement, and my parents were mostly armchair liberals, but sometimes they got up out of their armchair and did something. And one of the things that they did was take me to anti-war demonstrations when I was a little kid. And they were big, right? But it was a big part of my childhood, this whole scene. And even when I was younger, my mother used to work at a summer camp teaching art, and it was a Marxist summer camp. She wasn't a Marxist. I don't know how she got together with the Marxist summer camp. I'm not really sure why that happened, but in any case, I got free tuition. We didn't have much money, but because she was teaching there, I got to go. And I remember Pete Seeger would come and sing at the camp, right? And we would sing Woody Guthrie songs. And, they still are very, very much a part of my landscape. That kind of feeling of everyone should just get together and we should make a good world together. That's kind of what I got out of that. Anyway, so I was saying before we started tonight that in my view, what's happening now is bigger than that, bigger than the Vietnam War, anti-war movement. It has a completely different character. It's involving many more people. And it's really exactly parallel to the Mahabharata, which we were reading together on Wednesday nights. We have some few generations of people, including old fogies like me who just happen to grow up singing Pete Seeger songs. But we have several new generations of people who really represent a change of heart, a change of values, and who are wanting things that previous generations haven't wanted. And I think, I'm talking about the millennial generations, and again, including some of us oldsters, people who represent a greater degree of wisdom when it comes to taking care of each other and taking care of the world and loving each other. So obviously that's not every single person, but I think that there's, from my view, this has happened. I don't know why it's happened. I think part of it, and there could never be a complete explanation, but I definitely think that part of it is social media, that we just get to see and relate to many more people in many, many more different circumstances, and we become familiar with them, and we empathize with them, and on a daily basis. And this is not the experience of previous generations. Right? So there's that. There's also the collective understanding that our way of life is under threat from planetary destruction, environmental destruction. And I think that many, many people have that understanding, and that draws people together when we have that common understanding. There's also, again, I think because of social media, more of a sense of doing things collectively, that you can take swift collective action and join together with people in different kinds of ways that we didn't have before this. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be some sort of cultural pundit and come up with some explanation of why all this is happening. But the parallel with the Mahabharata is that there are these two related families, and they're at what is described in the Mahabharata as a crack in time. In other words, a shift that's between one way of being and another way of being. And particularly in the Mahabharata, between a more ignorant, self-centered, aggressive, warlike way of being, a more greedy, warlike, power-mongering way of being, and another way of being which is more about reverence and devotion and communal living and wisdom. And I think that the people that are participating in the Mahabharata on Wednesday nights understand that through that reading, we're being given a container through which to experience what's happening now. And understanding that there is destruction that has to happen before something new comes in. We know that from our own individual practice. There's no such thing as growth without destruction. And I'm not talking about killing people at all. I'm just saying that there's some kind of upheaval that feels chaotic and intense and destructive that has to precede the ushering in of some new way of living. And we see that individually in our own practice, but we have to destroy tensions that we have and make a kind of space for new things to come in. And it's just as true on a global scale. So the thing about the Mahabharata is that these two families are related. They're not separate. They're not opposites. One is not purely evil and one is not purely good. Everybody in there has karmas that they're working on, every single character, as I said on Wednesday night. And so the message is one of how can we maintain an open heart toward everyone while we're going through this. If we polarize, then we're missing the message of the Mahabharata. We're missing the point. if we polarize with hate or even with outrage, we have to take strong action as Krishna advises in the Mahabharata. We must act, we have to act decisively. And that's going to look at it in lots of different ways. We have to have tenacity, we have to have perseverance. We have to not give up. We have to cultivate wisdom and open-heartedness. So we have to take strong action, but we can't polarize. We have to recognize that we're related to everything that's happening here. In many, many different ways, we have participated in the situation that we have right now. We've participated through our lethargy, right? Our complacency. We've participated through our dogmatic outrage, our dogmatic positions about things, which led some people not to vote at all, right? We have participated by just letting things slide because they're inconvenient, especially around the environment. Every single day we participate in destroying the environment simply because it's too inconvenient to stop doing it. And when things have gotten really tough, a lot of us have dug our heads into the sand because it feels too overwhelming. Participating in politics in this country, and I guess in other countries too, feels very overwhelming because you don't know how to speak to power. When there's overweening power, it's hard to know how to speak to it. So now it seems that we've gotten into a situation where we're finding some voice, right? People, and I mean the heart is finding some voice. That's what is so moving about this. This isn't like it was during the anti-war movement, where there was a lot of emotion, but it was not about bringing this heart-based approach to everything. It wasn't about that. It was about stopping the war. And so it had a very different kind of discourse than we're hearing now, where people are just getting up and saying we have to love each other and we have to take care of the planet. And many, many, many people are saying that. And we can't allow this tyranny. And we will not go back we will not go back to this. But the thing is that in order to not go back, first we have to see what it is. And I think what's happening now is we're seeing what it is. We're seeing it much more clearly than we ever have. And we can't mistake seeing clearly for polarization. We have to recognize, as I said in a satsang some months ago, we have to recognize that we also made Donald Trump happen. We are also responsible for that. It's not just somebody else who did it to us. Right? We have to recognize our commonality with everyone in this situation. We're all human beings on this planet, first of all. Right? And we all have to survive here. And how are we going to do that? Hanging out in outrage is an old way of being, right? That's like old style politics, hanging out in outrage, being the outraged opposition. We have to be the open-hearted, unstoppable opposition. If we want something new, if we want a new age, not just, I don't mean new aginess, but I mean if we want that crack in time to come to fruition, it has to be based in something other than polarization and outrage. I come from that. I understand the politics of polarization and outrage. That's what I was trained in growing up and as a young adult. It didn't change the system. So I'm really excited about how reading the Mahabharata through this time, which seems almost like phenomenally uncanny timing. I'm really excited personally, and just for our community and anybody who might listen on the podcast, really excited about how that provides us with a guide for moving through this and presents us with all kinds of questions we can ask to explore our relationship to this. Getting back to what I started with, I was saying before satsang started that this is bigger and different than the Vietnam anti-war movement. And I suspect that in terms of political upheaval, internal political upheaval, that there hasn't been anything this big since the Civil War. I suspect I can't think of anything else this big, with this much potential to change the terms on which we live together here. And I think that the people who are saying we won't go back are absolutely right. The younger few generations that we have right now are operating by and large on quite different terms than generations before them. They're not going to suddenly change and start operating on 1950s assumptions. So if nothing else, we have time on our side. Because you all have a lot more years to live than the people in power. And I think that whatever the younger generations represent, and maybe I'm being a little pie in the sky, but I'm usually quite cynical about this, about generational change meaning anything at all worth paying attention to. Because I've lived through many generations and nothing much changed. And now here we are, right? So this optimism about these new generations is really a new thing for me. But you will prevail. No doubt about it. I don't know what it will look like, but you will prevail. And I also don't know what we're going to have to go through to get there. It might be quite horrible, but we have to keep insisting on what our hearts are telling us is the right thing. We have to keep insisting. And we are not good in this country, by and large, at persisting. We give up way too easily. And I know that from teaching you all. You know, you come to some little bump in your practice and you're like freaking out and crying and being angry. And I don't even know why anybody bothers telling the story of Milarepa anymore. It's like it's so divorced from how most people approach their practice these days. We have to have stories like, yeah, man, he went through 2 weeks of nothing. 2 weeks he sat on that cushion and nothing much was happening, man. Can't believe he kept going. And, you know, his teacher said, you have to clean my bathroom every day. Wow. So I'm going to open this up to you. You can say anything you like about what I just said, or I'd love to hear if you've thought about how this is being worked through the lens of your practice or your life as a practitioner, things you've noticed, opportunities you've taken or have missed. I'll just give one example to get us started from my own experience of all this. When Trump first won, like in those first few days, I realized how attached I am to democracy. Like I was like, oh my God, I'm so attached to democracy. And to be living in a democracy. And I almost felt like personally affronted that I might not be living in a democracy anymore. And not that I thought our democracy was so democratic, but it had at least some of the basics in place. And I really just felt groundless. I knew that things were not going to go on as usual, and that nothing could be assumed. And it was a very interesting tasting of just no ground, which I kind of enjoyed, despite the horror of the whole thing. So I kept going back there on purpose, tasting that feeling of I don't know what kind of country we have anymore, or if we're even going to have rule of law, or if the Constitution is going to be respected. And of course, we don't have those things right now, or we're on the precipice of those things being discarded. Right? It's astounding to think of. For me, anyway, that's astounding to contemplate. So anyway, I'll stop.
Shambhavi.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi. So I've heard you say two different things about working with something in terms of practice, and one is you work with it, and the other is that you're not really working with anything, you're just doing your practice and then it works itself out. So and then I just heard you say I keep going back and tasting that so that I can work with it. So I don't think I totally understand what it means to work with.
It means going toward presence and that ocean of wisdom and meeting it. So there's always effort, but we're not doing work to try to change ourselves in specific ways like we would do psychological work or self-help work. We're not identifying problems and then trying through some process to rid ourselves of those problems. That's what I mean by we're not working with things. We're not struggling with things. But what we are doing is making the effort to meet what is coming to us, what is opening, what is being revealed, and to meet it with freshness and awareness and a sense of discovery, to taste it or become immersed in it or explore it. So in that sense, we're doing work. For instance, that groundlessness that I was feeling, I wasn't thinking that's a problem. Or the fact that I felt afraid a little bit, I wasn't thinking, oh, my fear is a problem and I have to work with that problem. I was simply, oh, groundlessness is arising. I'm going to meet it and explore it. I'm going to rest in that and see what happens. That takes some effort, but it's a different kind of effort than the kind of relentless problem solving that we engage in, what we usually think of working with something.
Were you mostly talking about integrated practice where if you're walking down the street and these feelings of fear arise, you meet them? And or you talking about like or are you talking about and or are you talking about going to seated practice and when you're in seated practice trying to evoke some fear that you may have felt previously?
You don't try to evoke anything that happened in the past. You're dealing with what is arising fresh and new in that moment.
Okay.
We're not deliberately evoking something that we felt in order to work with it. We're dealing with what we're actually feeling and what we're actually experiencing. So if I'm sitting in practice and I feel some sense of being communicated to, I try to pay attention to that and meet it with my own awareness and open to it. If I feel fear, I try to relax and see what happens. But I don't have an outcome. I'm not relaxing and seeing what happens with fear so that fear will go away. I'm not meeting the sense of communication that's coming toward me so that something will happen. I'm simply meeting it. I'm simply being there. Like a conversation, you don't know what someone's going to say next. You have to listen.
I think some of the patterns that I've noticed in myself since the election and stuff is definitely like one is, well, I mean, I think at first there was still this like lingering grief about how close it felt like we were to getting to live a reality that we want with Bernie. And when that became not a possibility, it was just this like big woomph and like hard to really be there in the reality of the situation of a Trump election. And I still feel that somewhat. And so I feel like there's been like an internal disengagement for me, and like a head in the sand kind of thing going on. And then I wonder, like we are in like a really new situation, and it makes me wonder like about how to functionally manage our energy, and like if we need to collectively take strong action, and we can bring our practice to it, but there's also like for me it's like I'm on this like ordinary life trajectory trying to like get these things in place, and it's like at what point does it become appropriate to like set all of that aside? Like, is that what it's going to take, is like us setting aside the lives that we thought were possible prior to this new situation arising, so that we can get back to there? I don't really want to acknowledge the fact of it being a new situation. I want to like not have my apple cart disrupted, and I want to like continue going toward what I've been going toward, but maybe that's not going to be possible. That, I mean, it feels selfish to still want that, and I can like feel all of my privilege in even having the chance to go for that, while people aren't being allowed back in the country, and like all of these other securities are now suddenly so tenuous. So I don't know what to do about it.
I really appreciate talking about this in terms of practice tonight. I know for me, I've felt since the election a big hesitation. I don't want to dive in. I feel the attraction of letting it take me away from my practice, and being very, outraged. And I don't want to do that, and I feel like I don't yet have clarity on another way to move forward. And so I want to know, I feel like I'm looking for what is the alternative? What is the way to move forward with an open heart and clarity that will actually help build a world that I want to live in. And I feel like I don't have an answer to that. And I want one.
The view has helped me stay curious. Like I've been very curious about like what Trump's doing. I mean, I can say there's a little bit of like watching like a car crash on the side of the road. There's that little bit of that feeling of, ooh, I want to see a gory thing because I know it's going to happen kind of feeling. And the other week I was talking with a coworker, and it was the first time I actually thought we could have a civil war. Like this could be, and that came from the Mahabharata, like just in reading that story or starting to read it and having that view of, well, anything could really happen. Like there's no guarantee that the way America's been is going to continue in terms of semi-peacefulness, at least within my life. And that was scary and groundless, but there was still a feeling of, well, it might not happen. So I don't know how real or how embodied I have felt fear, but I have been very open and interested in especially the other perspectives of his supporters, and like how can they even think these are good ideas, and like how much pain are they feeling, or how scared are they to be able to go along with what's happening. So I think there's been a bit of trying to understand the other side of things and staying open to that.
Hi, Shambhavi, it's Anna.
Hi, Anna.
So for me, when I heard you say, there's a way that social media and the technology climate that we live in has created this possibility to get more information and connect more. And my experience is, in some ways, I feel like it's isolated me more, because what comes through on my Facebook feed is all the people that think like I do, and what comes through on my news. And, every once in a while I'm listening to NPR and I hear something that Kellyanne Conway says, but I, it feels like the media is a platform that feels more polarizing, and I don't know how to bridge that every once in a while I have a client or I have some people that are on the other side, but it seems that people kind of are afraid to go, well, let's really be real with each other and talk about, what's underneath how you feel and where is this human commonality. So, and also I'm on the left coast, which is very, very isolating, and it's easy to think the rest of the country thinks a lot how we think, and I know that that's not true.
Hey, Shambhavi, it's Avi.
Hi, Avi.
Hey. I think the single most striking image that I've seen over the last few weeks is the video of Spencer getting punched when he was giving an interview, and apparently he was punched twice. The alt-right leader. And when I saw that, and then I saw all of the piling on from the left, from the liberal side, about how wonderful this was, I felt myself seize up inside. And I have a friend who is talking about the fact that he wants to take his family up to Canada because he's from Russia and things could go shitty very quickly, and he wants to be as far away from here as he can. I have another friend who is part of a near-term human extinction group who says, really, this is only just a sideshow compared with the world ending because of environmental concerns. So it's like I'm navigating this sense of anxiety on all sides. And I'm wondering how to be open-hearted in a place where so many people have put up their fortresses and they've got guards outside the walls. Because it seems like open-heartedness, I don't want to believe that it's weak, but open-heartedness in that kind of environment feels weak and exposed. And it seems like if somebody else is putting up their fortresses and they have armed guards, and then they are sending guards to you with weapons, it seems insane to not put up a fortress myself. And I am trying to figure out how to be in this practice and stay open-hearted and be kind and compassionate and at the same time be fierce when I need to be.
Well, fierceness and open-heartedness are not opposed. Period. The thing is that if you really experienced open-heartedness, meaning wishing the best for everyone and not demonizing anyone, you wouldn't have this dilemma. Feeling that everyone has value and wanting to live in a world where everyone can express their value is a very powerful position to be in. It means you can act skillfully. It means you can be fierce when you need to be fierce and tender or withdrawing when you need to. It means you can do what you need to do with clear seeing. Part of it boils down to not seeing other people as other. Recognizing again that even though we have polarized politics, we are related. All of the sides are related through common karma. This karma is happening to all of us. It's not just happening to the bad guys or the good guys. And again, being open-hearted doesn't mean that you don't defend yourself when you need to. It doesn't mean you're open-hearted and then if someone comes at you with a knife, that you don't try to push them away. It means that you continue to operate from the values that you hold most dear, that represent your sense of innate goodness, no matter what, and that you don't let anyone cause you to deviate from that course. no matter how heinous you think their politics are or their actions are. I don't know what you're talking about, this punching incident, but...
A Nazi got punched.
A Nazi got punched?
Uh-huh.
So what's the point of that, right? There's no point to that. It's a waste of energy. It's a diversion. If you have clear seeing and an open heart, you're working for the good. You're not stepping off the path to go punch somebody. Whereas, if somebody is coming at you, you might punch them. But you're not going to cultivate that kind of outrage and retaliation and revenge attitude and waste your Shakti getting back at someone else who's actually not someone else. If we're in the practice, we have a much deeper understanding than that. And this is what it gets down to, not compartmentalizing. Like Nandi just said with some glee, the guy was a Nazi. And
I said that because you call him like an alt-right person. He's a Nazi.
Oh.
That's why.
Right, but you seem to be somewhat happy that he got punched.
Yeah, there is part of me that I think it's pretty. There's part of me that thinks it's funny that he got punched.
Well, this has to do with the compartmentalization, where we can forget our practice for a time because we want to enjoy someone getting punched. The person that's enjoying someone getting punched just out of revenge, like a revenge punch, is our karmic person. That's the crap we've been carrying around. That's only a burden and only weighing us down. And so we say to ourselves unconsciously in that moment, forget the practice, forget Ma, forget the fact that we're all here in this together. Forget all that because I just want to get my yayas out about this punch. So that's compartmentalization. And it takes effort in those situations because it feels good to stomp around. It takes effort to remind ourselves of what is really going on here. Go ahead, Alicia.
The main state in which this whole situation put me was big shock. And I think I'm still in that state in the sense that, but in a positive way, in the sense that I feel very alert and like I really want to understand what is happening on both sides. And the thing that strikes me the most is the fact that it seems to be a complete impossibility of communication between the two sides. And like we're listening to our radios, to our shows and our news, and that's all what we already know. And we've watched to Frontline last week, and there was some explanation of what the other side have been going through since Obama came into power and how frustrated they felt. I'm not defending them, but I'm saying that there was that feeling, and it feels like, to me at least, it went completely unnoticed, that there was that level of frustration. And I'm thinking, more than going out and opposing to what is happening now, I'm feeling like I should infiltrate on the other side and trying to understand better, because there's no other way to change that side if we're not closer. And so when I think about, I want to participate, I want to do something, but I feel more attracted to some strategy of that sort instead of going out and state where I'm standing.
You were talking yesterday about a feeling of resignation in a good sense, and resignation like yielding or just kind of settling into your actual condition. And that's really been happening since we talked for me in the last few days. What I feel is a lot of heartbreak, really. And what I'm noticing is that it's not a negative feeling, that, and I tend to be very pessimistic and negative, but I feel like through practice, I am seeing a way to respond to what's happening from a from a kind of hopeless, resigned place, but not a pessimistic place, not a negative place. And it also doesn't feel urgent in a weird way. Like it just feels like this is what's happening, and it's heartbreaking. And I also feel like tenderness toward my own like limited ability to respond to it. Like I'm going to do what I can, but I can't do everything. So I'm interested in just how in hopelessness that isn't despairing.
Hey, it's Jaya.
Hey, Jaya.
Along those same lines, what Matri was just saying, I am feeling a lot of heartbreak as well, but on the other side of that is just a lot of gratitude and appreciation for all the beauty that is coming out of this situation. Seeing everybody come together and stand up and do what is right. I think it's bringing out some really lovely aspects of people. So it's a blend of those things, but also what I find heartbreaking as well is seeing posts on Facebook where people are just the outrage and the cussing and the anger and it just seems so counterproductive and just falling into the polarization that you're talking about. It seems very not open-hearted and counterproductive, and it's just feeding the separation that this situation is. So I don't know. Part of me wants to say something to people in those moments. I guess that's what I'm working with too, is when to say something and when to not. What to do and what to not do. What I get a little paralyzed by feeling I need to do something and not sure. I was feeling powerless and not knowing where to put my energy and do something that's actually going to be beneficial. But I don't want to be complacent and not doing anything either. Thank you so much for talking about this today too, because I was thinking this on the way over here to satsang. I was thinking just bringing everything onto the path, and if we weren't going to talk about this, I was going to be kind of surprised because it's so huge right now. So yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Kind of like what Jaya said, I think what strikes me a lot, at least in looking at the discussion on Facebook, is just the level of incivility. And the glee that everybody seems to take in getting their shots in. Everybody is just so angry, and they just want to vent that anger. And I definitely used to be right in there in the tit for tat and wanting to counter arguments and now I just look at it and as soon as I see people devolving into this sort of name calling, and I just don't read any further, and it just makes me sad that there's so little communication.
I think this has to do with the perseverance part, right? It reminds me of the story I've told a bunch of times about when I first moved to Portland, Oregon. And I was just starting Jaya Kula. This was in 2007. And I had a Mo reading, a divination, a bead divination from this Tibetan yogini. And I just asked her about Jaya Kula. And she did her beads and she said, mediocre. And then she did her beads some more and she said, low mediocre. And I, of course, I looked crestfallen and probably embarrassed. And then she looked up at me and said, when you want to help sentient beings, you must expect obstacles. So that just sunk into my bones, right? That no matter what happened, I had something that I felt impelled to bring. And I was just going to keep trying to do that. And if it didn't work out right away, that's just the way it was going to be. If it was going to be mediocre or low mediocre, And in fact, it took about 3 years for Jaya Kula to really get going. But if I had turned away because I wasn't getting the response I wanted, this would never have happened, right? So I think that what you just said, Santosh, is just so great, because like we do hear all these people doing things that are upsetting, and talking in ways that are upsetting. And I think it's easy to get really turned off by that and kind of not want to participate. And of course, there's no point participating in a polarized argument on Facebook, but then the question is, so what are we going to do? Like, what is our role? How are we going to express our open-heartedness, right? Even if everything around us, or a lot of things around us, aren't going in the way we would want them to. Right? And certainly I've been very moved by a lot of positive things too, and people just getting together and supporting each other and loving each other. There's a lot going on. It's a very big picture. But the question is, how do we want to express ourselves, our longings, our vision? How can we do that? It's going to look completely different, or could look completely different from person to person. There are some people who are the kind of practitioners, not necessarily in our community, but certainly they exist. Their native form of self-expression is to do sadhana. And that's all they're going to do. And they're going to be in whatever way they are with the people that they encounter. But there's not going to be this kind of engagement. But for us who are householders, and we are going to be more engaged. And, how are we going to be engaged? And how is our engagement going to reflect whatever we've learned in our practice? How is our engagement going to reflect the fruit of our practice? That's really the crux of the question. Because the fruit of your practice, it doesn't just mean you run out and try to be compassionate, or run out and do all these things. Because the fruit of our practice also tells us that we all have a unique dimension. And we're all going to express ourselves differently. And we also have to use our energy wisely. And that's going to mean different things for different people. Did you want to say more?
There's also been just this real sense of inevitability about all of this. I mean, just in the way that that it almost could have been Bernie, but it was stolen from him, just because everybody is so venal and so power hungry, and I've always had this feeling that Trump was going to win, just because it seems like there's no getting through to either side. I mean, they talk about the echo chamber, and both sides just really firmly believe their point of view, and there's no common ground, and it just seems like it's these two, just like the Mahabharata, it's just like these two forces that just have to collide, and just to destroy something and see what comes out of it. But everything that is happening, as horrible as it is, I mean, it really just seems inevitable.
This has made me feel very selfish in all this, because I historically have just kind of ignored the news, and it's impossible to do that now, obviously, and I don't want to do that. And but I think if it wasn't for Regina, we've gone to a few events this last week, because she's very let's do everything. And I'm more, kind of sluggish. And
Historically sluggish.
And it makes me, and we went to this event at the church down there. We went to this storytelling yesterday or 2 days ago, Muslim, different people in the Muslim community telling stories, and just making me realize how fucking privileged I am. And it's kind of annoying that I'm not privileged. The majority of us here are white, and even being there, the majority of the people at these things were all we're white. It's but we should be using that to to better the world rather than what Donald Trump is doing. but like there's still this like whatever happens, I'll probably be okay because I'm white.
Well, it isn't just because you're white, because I think a lot of this has been driven by disenfranchised white people, right? I mean, a lot of Donald Trump's rise to power has been driven by disenfranchised white people, poor people who are having a hard time making a living and feel like their jobs have been taken away and all that. So it's not just white, it's white and a bunch of other stuff, right? Money. Chandas, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I've been thinking what to say. So one thing I don't want to do out of it is entertainment. The news is entertaining. Tried looking at like Seth Meyers or Bill Maher, their shows, and they're just having fun with this. I myself feel like the country is still the same beautiful country that I came to, and that's the same thing that I'm proud of. I mean, the landscape, the trees, and I have a feeling that I don't want to go anywhere, despite the administration being this way. For now, I don't have powers to vote, and I wonder often, like, can I call my representative, or do I even have one? Like, will they ask me over the phone, "Are you a citizen?" I always wonder about that. So something I might give a try. I here and there tweet about like Kamala Harris or something. News is really entertaining, I guess. I mean, I like to see tweets from these folks, whoever, good senators. It's an engaging time for me. I guess I just don't want to make it just entertainment, because it's hard to not enjoy all this for me. I like politics.
Well, I like politics too, and I think on some level what Banu said also rings true for me. It's like watching a disaster movie. There is some sense of thrill about the whole. For me, I'm not saying anybody else feels this, but definitely like watching two cars come toward each other and crash. The fascination with that. That's not the main thing I feel, but it's definitely an undertone.
I was feeling frustrated this morning, thinking that the news media is somehow like, which Snowden also talks about, that the news media always just reports on events. Like the reporter doesn't really have anything to say of their own, like that's what they believe. Like they're neutral commentators on the events. And I was just feeling frustrated with that today.
Well, I don't feel that that's true at all.
No.
What news are you watching? The opposite.
I mean, I guess their language is still like neutral. The way they report, this happened, that happened, this happened. Like, I guess all the news is progressive news. What I'm saying is all progressive. My iPhone shows me all news that's really good, but in the end, I still think the reporter doesn't really say anything of what they believe.
Maybe it's in comparison to the news in India. Maybe it's just such a different flavor. I don't know.
If Snowden talked about it, I wouldn't even have known. Like Snowden said that reporting in general is about just reporting on events from a neutral perspective. So, I don't know. I was feeling that maybe that's what's going on. That's why there is no change happening, because the media is just reporting. I don't know. People are demonstrating in the streets, which is real.
That's real.
Yesterday, for example, I read the news a little too closely, probably. So it sort of exhausted myself by the end of the day. I was like, okay, and what did that do? Like, how was that effective in anything? Like, I was informed at every step of the way, and I was like experiencing all of these really exciting things. And then by the end of the day, I was exhausted. My kids were exhausted because I hadn't been present with them. So when I went to DC last weekend, and I was there on the mall with 500,000 people, and that open-heartedness felt super fierce, and it was super open-hearted too, like looking into everybody's eyes, and people were smiling and connecting, and they were like there. And I used to go to this festival where it was like that for a week in the woods, and like people looked in each other's eyes and smiled, and it was very connected, and like I haven't really experienced that outside of that festival. And that was happening with 500,000 people on the mall in Washington, D.C., where like people don't look at each other and do that. And so like that really helped me, because ever since the election, every day I wake up with like a pit I feel a pit, and I feel like, well, I will go through this. And I mean, and like I think you said last week or the week before, sometimes it's easier to practice when things aren't, you don't perceive things as going their way. So that's been my experience, like in terms of like a seated practice and an asana practice. And Jenny's like, that's been easier to get to. Like there's no resistance because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna need this. Okay, suit up, you know. So, and that, you know, last weekend was such a great thing for me, and so what it just made me think, like, to be with people and be open-hearted with people has to be the way we go through whatever we're gonna. I mean, that just has to be how we face this. Otherwise, you know, first of all, I won't make it through. Like, I couldn't make it through if I was shut down from it. So I don't have anything clear to say, but
that sounded pretty clear to me.
And I feel very fortunate too that, you know, when things do get swirly, like they did yesterday, it's pretty swirly. But like usually, I mean, there were other people around to take care of the children, but usually there aren't. And so then I have people that need to eat and have poop wiped, and like there's this very very service oriented job that I'm in, that, you know, and I have to stay present and open hearted for them. And so that's helpful too. Like they're seeing sort of the play aspect of it. Like, you pretend to be Donald Trump, and I'm like, oh God, okay, you know. And it's like, and so, you know, there's like this aspect that, you know, helps. I can't get sunken into despair with them.
I think the Obama years for me were just an easy time to not pay attention. It was just sort of, you know, someone's president that I voted for, so things are fine, and I can just sort of navel gaze and be in my own little world. I think it's been good to have that openness of paying attention to things other than my little life. So it's felt connecting in that way.
Well, I definitely have been feeling tasting the groundlessness, and I keep, like, I'll feel it and I'll be like, but it's not like really groundless. And I have this, but it's way more groundlessness than I've ever experienced, like for a real sense of like looking off a cliff, like, oh, there it is, it's really there. And trying to remember that groundlessness, like kind of in a different way, is our real condition, is really helpful and keeps me from feeling loony bin like. And I also have this really strong feeling of like, oh, this is what a lot of people already felt like this fear and frustration and like a real gut feeling of just all of those things. So I feel that privilege that you were talking about, Nandi, like this really strong, like a real feeling of privilege, and not just like, oh yeah, privilege, I had that. And I also feel so much gratitude for having this and practice, and like in a way, I mean, I loved going to the rally, and I want to do a lot more actions and a lot of things like that. But to be here in Satsang, it just feels a lot more. It feels. I feel really grateful, fortunate, and like feels like churning or something. It feels like we're not just navel gazing, you know.
Turning the milk.
Yeah, and with that, all of this, I feel like and you've said this before too, it's like we have this giant, bright, magnified mirror on America, and it's causing people to talk about these things and really get into the nitty gritty of how we treat each other, and just seeing some conversations on
social media, people calling each other out if they're not recognizing their privilege or their inherent sexism or things like that. Even within the liberals, I feel like people are really examining what they're doing in a new way. And I've had that same sense of inevitability and sort of relief, because then everything's just kind of naked and everyone's upset across the board, and that feels like more real than the sort of just playing along that kind of happens. So I've been really overwhelmed with all the news and having to sometimes just shut away from it, but it feels alive and real.
I'm not a person who is easily angered, but I've always had a trigger since I was little, which is when I see someone who has no power being taken advantage of, it makes me angry and upset. Whenever I see a picture of I'm surrounded by white men and they're smiling and they're signing something, and then I think of my students, a third of whom are immigrants or children of immigrants, and how this impacts them and their families. It's difficult. It's hard for me to feel open-hearted. I'd like to imagine a situation in which I could actually have a conversation with someone who supports Trump and be open to listening to them. And really curious about why, what's led them to that point of view. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to imagine. I was in a situation where I tried to do that a few times and I couldn't, so that's where I'm at. In my practice, I've been wishing for the energy to just stay, try to do what I can and attend rallies and do the actions that I can do, and try to, be surrounded by people who feel hopeful and positive and forward-looking. So
it is just a fact that if we can't feel sympathy or empathy for someone else's pain, that we won't feel sympathy or empathy for our own pain. And we all have pain. And it turns out that all our pains are pretty much the same. We all have pain of feeling isolated or lonely. We all have pain of feeling undervalued. We all have pain of feeling we can't express ourselves fully. We all have pain of wondering what our place is in the world. So all those people that are out there all have those same pains. They're expressing them in their unique ways. But if we can't look in Donald Trump's face and see his pain, he is in tremendous pain. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that we have to just be, oh. I'm not saying that. But if you can't feel sympathy for other people's pain, then you are actually not feeling sympathy for yourself. And then when it comes to yourself, you're going to be denigrating yourself and dissing yourself. So again, we can take fierce action, but to dismiss other people's pain is to dismiss ourselves, really.
I have this weird sense that, I don't know if that's the right term, but the chickens have come home to roost. That's the feeling I get.
Me too.
And as I'm watching these absurd injustices go down, I just can't help think about the shit that we've done, the United States government has done in other countries, and this is a micro version of that, so I just think about that and the karmic implications of how we've conducted business around the world. But one thing that, in terms of my practice, I've noticed it's helped me kind of orient myself to the world a bit. What is my impact in this world? What is my capacity in this world and stuff? And so I've really been looking at that a lot. I think since before Trump got elected, like, or when Bernie really came out of the scene, I started like orienting myself more, like thinking about, what my choices are, how am I impacting the world directly, by using a plastic bottle or like throwing a t-shirt away or, eating a cow, like all the way to who I vote for or whatever. But so I feel like this has been like a really great opportunity to look at that even more closely, because I feel like, the stuff he is doing is just it's so much bigger, and we can't look away, or I can't look away. I can't seem to look away, and feeling the pain of other people, and just wanting to, I guess, see it throughout the whole world is kind of something that I've noticed, like, just because, yeah, I mean, we've been doing all kinds of things across the planet, like the plastic island in the middle of the ocean, like Trump didn't do that, and like all this stuff. Or like we watched a documentary about the clothing industry and the, millions of tons of stuff that goes into landfills and just like never biodegrades, and people who are hurt from that industry. Just kind of, it's really given me an opportunity to focus on the world and how I can actually be different in the world. And another thing that I really noticed was, I think a lot of the millennials' outrage is that we grew up I feel like we grew up like kind of being told that we would have an opportunity to live a certain life, and it was never that way ever at all. And like, from college tuition going 200% from the 70s to now, or, just stuff like that. And so I feel like Bernie Sanders was like that, like, oh, we can't actually have that thing that we were always told we could have. And then now we have Trump, and it's like, oh, I guess we're just going to keep not having the thing we thought we could have. So that's been really interesting. Especially as like, I'm sure all of the millennials, like we're kind of starting to move into having a life, like lives. And it's like, like, are we ever going to get like a footing here, like, so that we can actually live a life? And then really like having practice, like that feels like my footing, like I'll always have the practice no matter how poor I am or how rich I am. Like I can always do practice. So that I'm really grateful for that, for sure. But it's also just like kind of fucked up. There's no footing for me to like create a life. I mean, there is, but it just seems much further off than the hope of Bernie Sanders.
You can't pay the rent with sadhana. Or can you? With enough of it.
I just feel super grateful for my practice lately. Like, I feel like it's been kind of chaotic inside. Like, I feel like my practice, when I sit down and practice, there's just so much energy. It feels like it's changed and moved, and like my body feels really different. And I'm pregnant too, but it's besides that. But I just feel like it's really, like the state of the world is really changing my state inside. Like I'm seeing that there really isn't that separation that I've felt for so long, that it's in me too. And I keep contemplating that song from a while ago about Trump, of what am I seeing in myself too. I was reflecting on that this morning actually, and it's just so powerful being an acupuncturist right now too, working with people every day, going through really intense experiences and emotional states. Like the feeling of my practice right now is like it's helping me like be flexible, but like hold this grounded place in myself. And I do feel weary too, but my practice just feels it feels alive. And I love the Mahabharata, like the feeling of time with it, like reading the foreword about the cycles of time. And I never really got like, oh yeah, we're in the Kali Yuga, blah, blah, blah. I never really understood that. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, whoa, we're in the Kali Yuga, okay. Like, there's so much like time. Like I'm just really like being blown away by that feeling of that. Just wanted to share that. You want to say hi to Shambhavi?
Hey, Ansel.
Hi.
Monkey.
Monkey. I am a monkey.
I'm a monkey.
Can we be monkeys together? Okay, good. Done deal then.
Bye.
Love you, Ansel.
I had a dream a couple nights ago that Trump dropped bombs on the U.S. and everyone in Jaya Kula had like congregated in this giant white mansion that we were staying in as like our base to see what we were going to do because the bombs were giving people radiation sickness. And in the dream, Budra sent me a video of a Ganesha statue that came alive in a museum. Like the statues of the deities were coming alive and dancing because it was the end of the world. And I realized that like I'm terrified that it's, you know, like I'm really glad that this stuff is coming to a head because it was happening. It was happening with Obama. You know, like it's just so obvious that, you know, like a lot of people said that you can't ignore it anymore. And I didn't, you know, I would have preferred Hillary because I think less people would have been, you know, like the stuff that's happening now wouldn't have been happening, but I didn't want her to be president either. And like, it feels like real change could happen because this is so extreme, but it is terrifying to think that like, this is the person that's the president. And I think I just didn't realize like how real that could be, that like we could all die. Just because of how, you know, how he responds to a like negative tweet about himself, you know, like who the hell knows what could happen. But I think I felt really shut down because I did a lot of activism when I was younger and I got really burnt out and felt like I was just in like a sea of people with all, you know, just so many karmic things swirling and no view and no focus. And I think that's what a lot of people are experiencing now with like the internet. There's just all these different views and goals and hopes and, you know, people's fixations just raging at each other because they feel so powerless. But I don't really know like what to do about it. I feel like I want to be able to see the pain that people are experiencing. I feel like more and more about like with that video that Bernie did, like really asking people like, why did you vote for Trump? Why do you want this? You know, like really trying to get at the core reasons why everyone feels so powerless and so taken advantage of by the system. But I don't know what to do. Like, I feel like, you know, like the system isn't working and hasn't been working for so long and I don't have confidence in it. And my inclination is always like, fuck it, burn it all down and like, find a way to like grow crops and like have everyone that I care about live in a giant mansion somewhere. What? Yeah, I mean,
does it have to be white?
I don't know why I'm white, but like it's just like a very nice version of Merrill House.
White House alt White House.
Alt White House.
I'll bring some paint.
I mean, it just feels like that could be real. You could be taking back our own power by like not relying on this system that feels so broken in all these ways to give us resources and just basic ways of surviving.
Hey Ariel, you get the last word.
Oh, great! I've been waiting for this moment.
That was such a great answer. You got it.
Well, I really relate to what Deva Madhu just said because I feel a lot of terror, and I've talked to you before about my feelings of impending doom and the just anxiety that I feel when I like allow myself to consider what could really happen and what we could witness not just here but around the world as the fallout of everything that's happening and this certainly accelerating the already existing tensions that are just creating so much violence. And I think that mostly I
don't let myself think about it, and I kind of numb out in various ways, and I think that there's the opportunity for me here to be more courageous and kind of in tasting the groundlessness in the way that you were describing, and trying to use that as an opportunity for practice instead of having that feeling of wanting to not feel that like really existential fear, which is what I actually do feel when I allow myself to. Yeah, and I'm glad to be, I guess, be reminded of that opportunity today, and I hope that we keep talking about it so that those reminders keep coming.
I'm sure we will keep talking about it. So the basic teaching is twofold about ground and groundlessness. And of course, about groundlessness, Chogyam Trungpa said it best. He said, the bad news is you're in free fall. The good news is there's no ground. So that is our condition. It's just that we don't have opportunities to notice it as often as we would be good for us. This is a big groundlessness up. But the other side of the teaching is refuge. That even though we don't have the ground we assume we have when we're walking around in a semi-comatose state, there is refuge in essence nature. And that is outside of any consideration of ground or groundlessness. When we can be immersed in alive awareness, in presence, then there is no sense of fear of losing our ground. So we have to go through this experience of groundlessness, which is really an experience of the artificiality of our concepts of ground. That's what groundlessness is. It's an experience of the artificiality or contrived quality of our concepts of ground. And it's an experience of the pointlessness of trying to establish permanency, an experience of permanency in impermanence. So when we get that insight into the contrivedness of our concepts of ground, our experience of ground, then we feel like we're in free fall. We feel emptiness and insecurity and fear. But when we have real contact with presence, then we have not ground, but refuge. We have a home that is eternal, beyond this life, beyond anything, and beyond any consideration of ground or no ground, or permanence or impermanence. So that's what the practice is really about. And we have to go through groundlessness to be able to experience that. Because as long as we're still trying to reestablish ground as the basis for our life and our happiness and our feeling of contentment and security, then we're always going to have to continually break that up and experience groundlessness again. But when we can pass through that and experience presence, then we're done with ground and groundlessness. It doesn't matter anymore. Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritam gamaya sarvesham swastir bhavatu sarvesham shantir bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugantim pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva bandhanam Mrityor mukshiyamamritat Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Gratitude for the wisdom that brings us these opportunities to experience our real condition. And out of that, the compassion and empathy that comes for all beings. Jai Ma Shivaham.
Jai Ma Shivaham.
I'm sure we will discuss more of this, because every day we wake up and it's like, whoa! Jaya Kula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.